Hello and welcome to the WIP, the What If podcast that's a work in progress. I'm your host, Agent of Swole, the Slim James. Given that there's been a lot of talk of Captain America lately, past couple days, I figured I'd make my own little bonus episode just talking about some Captain America developments. So, spoilers, if you haven't read Steve Rogers, Captain America #1, which may be out now or next week or something. Or there's also minor spoilers for Captain America, Civil War. So if you haven't seen that, it's very minor spoilers and, whatever. But when I first read an article that Steve Rogers was going to return as Captain America, youthful and full of vim and or vigor, alongside Sam Wilson, Captain America, I was a bit skeptical. They couldn't both keep the name. This was obviously a cash grab for Cap's 75th anniversary, but what was the twist? Was Sam Wilson going to get the short end of the stick? Would it be some sort of temporary re-youthening of Steve before he returned to being Old Man Rogers? With his little shield blue jumpsuit or something. But yesterday, the twist was revealed. And what a twist it was. Why is Steve Rogers back to being young in Captain America? To further twist the knife when it's revealed that he's been Hydra since day one. This seems like the worst idea I've ever heard. Not being a fanboy or anything, I'm okay with Steve Rogers turning bad guy, even if him revealing himself to be a member of Marvel's Nazi surrogate Hail Hydra, Heil Hitler organization seems a bit audacious and potentially offensive. But you need some drama, and in comics, all change, however permanent it may seem, is only a pen stroke away from being wiped clean. So you could do a Steve Rogers is evil storyline. But to imply that Steve has been evil since the early 1900s, and that this has all been part of some master plan, is the most ridiculous plot contrivance I've heard of since the Clone Saga in Spider-Man circa the early 90s. Apparently it's all part of some master plan for Captain America to get frozen for several decades, maybe die a few times, brain time travel back to 1602, give up being Captain America several more times, becoming the Captain and or Nomad and or Steve Rogers, agent and or director of S.H.I.E.L.D. Also, part of Hydra's master plan is for Captain America to defeat Hydra several times, maybe get transported to the Heroes Reborn universe a bit, and probably do a bunch of other time travel bullshit. It's all part of this master plan. What offends me about this Cap reveal, it's lazy writing, a retconning twist for its own sake that holds up to zero scrutiny in the grand scheme of things. Writer Nick Spencer has doubled down, saying this is definitely not a clone, not a double, not mind control. This is totally real, guys. And I'd be able to buy a Steve Rogers has been recently evil for a few years storyline, possibly related to him re-aging and then de-aging because of the infinity formula or whatever that is, or some such. But this since day one is a bit preposterous. It won't stick. It has to hold up to like 75 years of continuity or whatever. Marvel will probably undo this in a bit, and we'll all feel the stupider for getting all worked up in the first place. Going back to the Clone Saga, Spider-Man runs afoul of a clone from a book 15 years prior. Then it's revealed that the Peter Parker we know and love has actually been a clone since that book. And the clone that just showed up, Ben Reilly, who was on the run for like 4 years in story, he's the real Peter Parker. Readers felt screwed, understandably, that the character they had been reading for the past decade plus was a lie, and the whole storyline made the Spidey books a bit dour, the antithesis of Spider-Man's initial appeal. With all that being said, Marvel eventually walked it back, having Ben Reilly die, revealing it was Peter Parker, the first one that we know and love, was actually the real one, and that Ben Reilly was the clone the whole time, with not a great explanation, if any. That, oh, nope, just kidding. It was pretty much just like clearing their hands of it and pulling a mulligan. Now, at least this was a little more plausible in storyline because it involved clones, so you could understand why the Spider-Man that we thought was a clone was actually acting identically to the Peter Parker that was supposed to have been a clone, but then wasn't. Either way, you got two of the same character, so it's okay, but it was still stupid. But this, again, is thrown out the window because this is purportedly the real Steve Rogers, legit, no bullshit. But, so, how do they undo it? Because obviously they need to get Steve Rogers back to good, as Matchbox 20 would say. Here's a few ideas. Number 1, he lied! Steve Rogers is just pulling the wool over our collective eyes to dramatic effect. He was initially recruited by Hydra, thought better of it, but now is going back as a double agent to take down Hydra from within. It seems pretty stupid. We lied! Number 2. We lied! It actually is mind control, and the writer and or Marvel Comics are full of shit. Steve Rogers has only been Hydra for a few years, back to the whole and de-aging thing, but he's had false memories implanted, a la Wolverine, however that works, to make him feel like he's been Hydra the whole time. So this would just basically be going back on what you said, which would be akin to the Clone Saga, where like, no, this is Ben Reilly is Spider-Man now for like a year and a half or whatever, and then eventually they just had a big event, and wouldn't you know, Peter Parker was back to being Spider-Man. Out number 3, some time travel bullshit. Somehow, somebody travels back in time and stops Steve from being recruited by Hydra. Not much else changes, because this was, once again, a terrible twist, a swerve for its own sake that doesn't make sense in any of the continuity, so in theory nothing else would change because it wasn't written like this in the first place. Out number 4, maybe some dimensional travel bullshit. Also reality warping. They replace Steve with a Cap from a counter-Earth that isn't Hydra, but is identical in every other way. This is probably the least likely to happen. Number 5, don't worry about it. Marvel ignores the storyline contradictions of Cap being Hydra since day one, because the continuity is hazy at best. How long ago was Cap thawed out? So that means, the time he was frozen varies from about 20 to 50 years. Actually, 70. But they push forward, but then Steve either heroically sacrifices himself for redemption to be revived with a clean slate at a later date, or as in option 1, he says he was just kidding, but it's less dramatic than being a double agent. They just basically are like, yes, it's true, but don't worry about it anymore. We're just kind of forget that happened. Honestly, I don't really care what they do. This is another irrevocable change to a core character that will be revoked soon enough because it's comics. It just irks me that it's a sensationalistic twist for its own sake. And I've seen this happen before, and all it means is just a few years of degrading a character before things miraculously go back to status quo. And if they don't go back to status quo, yeesh, they kind of screwed up Captain America with this one. But, I suppose they're trying to move forward, maybe give Sam Wilson some shine. Are they just going to do that by completely sacrificing Steve Rogers? Who's to say? I honestly think not. He's going to end up getting back to good, if only by the heroic self-sacrifice. But another trending hashtagging Cap subject is the matter of giving Captain America a boyfriend. It was surfacing on Twitter, like, give Captain America a boyfriend, in the vein of give Elsa a girlfriend from Frozen. The collective internet probably wants it to be Bucky in the MCU, of course. Now, I'm not opposed to, gay superheroes or anything like that. In fact, seeing Spider-Man in Civil War, it seems like his character would actually make sense if he was gay. He's sort of a little, outsider and sort of awkward, trying to find his identity. But part of his stories are steeped in his girlfriends that are part of the reason why he's torn between wanting to have a normal life and his responsibility. That said, you could just change Gwen Stacy to, Greg Stacy. Ben Stacy might be a bit weird given the whole Uncle Ben thing. But I digress. The point is that I don't think Captain America is the right man for being a gay superhero. Not because America means straight white men, but because the character of Captain America himself has always seemed closer to asexual than anything else to me. If it were up to me, he wouldn't have kissed Sharon Carter in Civil War, especially on the heels of Peggy Carter's funeral. To me, Captain America, Peggy Carter should be Captain America's one true love, and that's why he doesn't date much, because he lost his one true love, sort of like a widow or something. But, I guess that's not really going to happen. But back to the point. Captain America isn't a character that ever wants to find a nice girl and settle down. Spider-Man, he's married Mary Jane, and, there's always this thing where in the future sometimes he retires, whereas Captain America pretty much wants to fight till he dies. So I could never see him, being torn and wanting a girlfriend. So the bottom line of what I'm saying is I don't want Captain America to have a boyfriend. I also don't want Captain America to have a girlfriend either. His character is much more just asexual to the point where it sort of defines him that he's almost above humanity. It's really weird. All right. So just to tie this whole thing back to the source of all of this, actual comic books, I'm going to review the first Captain America book I had handy, which is Steve Rogers: Captain America Free Comic Book Day 2016 edition, number indeterminate, possibly asymptotically approaching number 1. I'm glad I had this so I could review a bit of the actual writing of Nick Spencer, and this whole Steve Rogers Captain America story sort of book universe. Commander Sharon Carter, leader of S.H.I.E.L.D., is testifying before a Senate subcommittee trying to explain a botched operation from a week prior in Graz, Austria. Steve Rogers, kind of Captain America, is stopping a Hydra threat, but surprise, it was a double-blind attack and another bombing went off concurrently, killing 2 Americans. Luckily, Steve Rogers was able to shame Senate about them being on recess for 6 weeks while said attack occurred. If they hadn't, it would have been sort of the same old, well, we tried our best, we can't win them all argument, which the committee was having none of beforehand. So that's a little bit of a nice plot convenience. I read an AV Club review of Steve Rogers Captain America #1, and there were some complaints about the dialogue. For the most part, I found the dialogue okay. Most every character had something quippy to say, like they're all Spider-Man, essentially. But I'm not sure if that isn't the way comics have always been, or at least a byproduct of the MCU movies where all of the characters got something sarcastic to say so that you don't have to worry about them taking, comic books too seriously. That'd be silly if they took the plot seriously. And for the most part, it didn't offend me, except for one bit. Sam Wilson, who's also Captain America, is performing an operation for Steve Rogers as a favor, and it's sort of a side plot. His sidekick, Joaquin Torres, aka All New All Different Falcon, wonders aloud if Sam Wilson will be supplanted as Captain America if he keeps doing favors for Steve Rogers, which is an important point that needs to be addressed out loud, so it's good that it was sort of hit upon in this little preview, and hopefully be a big tenet of the series as this sort of dichotomy of Captain Americas. Maybe he can be Captain North America and Captain South America. But anyway, the duo's entrance quip to attacking some terrorists involves FAO Schwartz reference and the piano scene from Big. It's so nonsensical and outdated and not even funny that I almost cringed reading it. That's not a thing I get reading comics a lot. Humor's so bad that it's cringeworthy. There's dated retro references, but this just was nobody remembers that it was FAO Schwartz, I guess. I mean, unless you've seen Big a lot. And FAO Schwartz has been closed for 5 years at least. So, yeah. Maybe there is too much quippery. But that's more of a complaint about superheroes in general, I guess. Another thing pointed out by the AV Club article was the fact that the whole book is heavy-handed political allegory. I'm here to tell you that's 100% true. The new reconstituted Hydra is now an ISIS surrogate, with blatant phrases being bandied about like targeting civilians in public places, and using social media to recruit new extremists, all while attempting to instill a climate of fear. Combine that with blowhard senators, and yeah, it's a bit on the nose. And sometimes blatant surrogates and analogs for real-world events are necessary to make a point, but unless this thing was a tight arc and maybe a limited series that went more realistic and grim and gritty, it could almost border on insulting, where you're putting in these clear surrogates for real-world problems next to zany plot twists and characters spewing superhero action lines that undermine the point they're trying to make with the realistic elements. If this were something where Captain America was going to take down Hydra, or it's, an espionage and he's part of Hydra, but it was much more grim and gritty, I guess, more serious in tone, as sort of a limited series. You could see doing something that's so close to reality and on the nose. But as it is, it's sort of an odd juxtaposition and a bit jarring, because there's a lot of comic book stuff going on next to Senate committees and talking about terrorism. But, on to the most important part, was there any foreshadowing of Steve Rogers, agent of Hydra in this preview? Nothing directly, nothing that stuck out like a sore thumb. There were a couple of lines that looked prescient in retrospect, though. Sharon Carter mentions Hydra manifesting itself in ways we've never seen before, her emphasis. So, Captain America being evil, never seen before. The final conversation involving Red Skull could have been alluding to this, but it could also have easily been fobbed off as a generic supervillain mystery speak monologue, where he talks about wheels already being in motion, and I will truly have won, which is a terrible sentence grammatically. So, that could just be alluding to the fact that he won Captain America's mind or something. And Cap wanting to declare war on Hydra formally is also probably part of a plan to undermine the security of the United States through fear and what have you. But that goes back to the stupider part of the story where Steve hasn't been part of Hydra for a few years, which would make this a little more plausible, but rather since day one, which is stupid. So yeah, rather no blatant foreshadowing. So overall, what does the future hold for Captain America, Steve Rogers? I'm of the thought that he'll be evil for a while, then heroically sacrifice himself, possibly being a double agent. All of this is sort of a feud to get Sam Wilson a little more shine as Captain America, and then Steve Rogers will come back at a later date because it's comics. Yeah, so on that note, we'll see you later, and check out theslimjames.com. In closing, let me remind you that the What If podcast is available in myriad media. Audio is available on iTunes and Stitcher, maybe something called Blubrry, a little bit on SoundCloud, but the accounts on there are expensive, so only a little bit at a time. Videos of the podcast are available on YouTube, and some on Vimeo. There's also a related Tumblr at whatifcolors.tumblr.com, and all of this is visible at theslimjames.com/WIP. So go out there and find us, and don't spend the rest of your life asking, what if? Not bad.
You didn't leave that.